The State of Crypto is presented by Tron, connecting the world to the power of cryptocurrency.
Well, you guessed it, House Republicans are making new moves to regulate crypto on Capitol Hill. And last week, they announced the creation of a new subcommittee on digital assets, financial technology, and you guessed it again, inclusion. Joining us to discuss this is Ohio Congressman Warren Davidson. Welcome back, Congressman.
Yeah, good to be with you. Thank you for covering this.
Well, this is what we do, and we're going to dive straight into it. You are the vice chair of this first of its kind subcommittee. But we got to ask you this, and we've been discussing, how do we go ahead from the last time you came on and you spoke about the fact that there's a likelihood of stablecoin regulation coming. But this is a new Congress, and what is going to be the biggest policy priority for this new subcommittee, keeping in mind that FTX has just changed the entire equation?
Yeah, French Hill's the chairman, so as vice chair, my main role is to support him, and so I'll let him speak for definitively what his priorities are. But the landscape in Congress, we made quite a lot of progress on the Stablecoin Bill. We came a little short in terms of the kind of clarity that we needed from the text. We had directional clarity, and when you look at the setting aside Tether, the next largest stable coins, U.S. dollar coin, Gemini, Paxos, things like that, they're regulated as New York trusts. They have disclosure requirements. They're audited financials. They're overseen by New York state regulators. And the idea that we couldn't trust those in other states isn't really plausible. So we believe that kind of regulatory regime could provide a path. And what are the characteristics of that you could make concrete, and so you could create a clear, federally regulated stablecoin, so that you'd have clarity throughout the market. This would cover not just relationships with the payments end of things, but also with banks and others, so you could be clear, hey, this is an asset and it's valued appropriately, as in a one-to-one valuation. So that's probably the crawl phase. I think the walk phase is getting some clarity so that you know what the Securities and Exchange Commission is going to do. They've engaged in regulation by enforcement, and that's frustrated markets quite a lot.
So just to follow up on that, thank you for that explanation. Right now we have this FTX implosion. You have a lot of people in the U.S. government and Congress being like, we need to do something. We need to do something to prevent this. I think it's not an understatement to say that the rest of the world is also looking at the U.S. to be like, what is the U.S. going to do? So just kind of like looking at the context that we're in, what do you think is the most urgent priority for regulation? I mean, is it still stablecoins? Because stablecoins, it's a different problem, right? I mean, if you sort of had a magic wand here, I mean, what do you think, given all the drama that we've seen in crypto, what should Congress be focusing on now to sort of prevent this next thing from happening?
Well, I think one of the reasons why stablecoin is important is it's something that's easy for members of Congress to grasp. It's very concrete and tangible. It either holds the dollar-to-dollar match or it doesn't. It's easy to audit those things and have a clear standard. And if you look at how it's related to FTX kind of imploded when it was shown that their stablecoin wasn't a stablecoin at all. FTT was backed by nothing except empty promises of someone that appears to have committed a pretty big fraud. So this would be a hook to say this couldn't have even happened in a lot of cases. Billions of dollars in value with their FTT token. So that appears to have been a fraudulently issued quote stablecoin, never intended to be stable at all. And so when you look next, well, what is a security? And Gary Gensler will say, oh, it's so clear. We have the Howey test. It's not clear at all, which is why he says, come in and talk to us. And company after company comes in and talks to him, including FTX, and they either don't detect things like they didn't on Celsius and who knows how many others, or they do things that just endless discovery for years in some cases, and they never get around to definitively saying, nope, this is a security, or hey, here's a no action letter. Only 3 no action letters. So it's really driving capital outside of our markets. We have to make a bright line test that everyone knows, not just the innovators and investors, but the regulators themselves, if it's a security or not.
Right, but I think the other issue here is that FTX Global, there was FTX US, but FTX Global was outside of the United States, right? So would any of this have prevented that from happening? Because that's a slightly separate issue.
I think it would have, and fundamentally, if we had better markets in the United States, look, we have like 5% of the world's population. We have almost 25% of the world's GDP, but we have roughly 50% of the world's invested capital. Our markets are incredibly robust. When we look at crypto, 75+% of the liquidity for crypto is offshore, and that's because they're looking for places that provide a clear law. The United States doesn't do that. And normally when you have problems, Congress is ready to provide some sort of law, even if it's a bad one. In this case, Congress, we've had really a nonpartisan, not even bipartisan. There's no real partisanship on whether we should do some sort of light touch regulation in this space, like was done for the internet. The internet was going to be a thing somewhere, and we made it a thing in the United States because we protected it in a sense of you could have clarity. If you do these things, then you're within bounds. And if you don't, well, then, okay, you might have problems. Everyone stayed within bounds, and it flourished in the United States. And I think investors would be much better protected if we did the same for fintech in the United States.
So, Representative Davidson, we have waiting in the wings Hester Peirce. She's an SEC commissioner. You know her well. And the question we have here is this. Who's going to regulate the spot markets? This has been driving everybody crazy now forever. Is it going to be the SEC? Is it going to be the CFTC? Is it going to be something else? Where is it? Who exactly is going to do that job? Because I think that's one thing that the crypto markets have been like pulling their hair out at.
Yeah, and I think they're frustrated because it's so easy. How is it? Look, we have a gold ETF. How's that regulated? When you buy and sell gold, gold is a commodity, but when you set up an ETF, it's a security. So it's regulated by the SEC for the ETF, but the people that on the back end are buying and selling gold, that's regulated by the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, CFTC. So how is it that Bitcoin, the only thing that pretty much universally everyone agrees is not a security, how is it hard to get a spot ETF for Bitcoin? So it would be crazy to think that Congress literally needs to pass a law to create a Bitcoin ETF, but there's been no action forever out of the SEC, and it's really, how's it different than any other spot ETF for commodities? I mean, oil is overseen. It's the largest commodity. It's not overseen by the Federal Reserve or the SEC, yet there's spot ETFs for it.
So will Congress actually pass a law that would specifically lay out who is in charge of the spot markets? Just that we don't have any confusion. This is driving everyone nuts.
Yeah, we may have to, but I don't understand how it's not already clear when Bitcoin in particular is a commodity. And when you look at other things, that's where you would be clear if it's a commodity or not. Let's say Ethereum.
Well, clearly it's not
clear. There's a little bit of a debate whether it is or not. Most people say it's a commodity. If we passed a bright line test, then it would be crystal clear. Ripple XRP, one of the most contentious cases. Obviously, investors and holders of XRP believe that it's not a security. But the SEC's filed, really frozen it for U.S. investors and crippled it, really harming investors instead of protecting investors if, in fact, it is not a security. And so, this is where if it's not a security and then it should be regulated in terms of buying and selling the actual asset. But then when you structure it as an ETF, then of course the SEC oversees the ETF. Just like a gold or an oil ETF.
I get that it seems fairly clear, but it doesn't seem clear to the regulators. So I'm wondering, here you have a phone, you have, I assume, a direct line to Kevin McCarthy, and you have a majority here in Congress, a slim majority to be sure, but nonetheless, you still have Democrats who would sign on to it. When can we get a piece of legislation that clearly lays out what is a security when it comes to crypto, what should be regulated by the SEC, and what should be regulated by the CFTC? When can we see legislation like this?
Well, I wouldn't. There is legislation like that. It just hasn't moved. Darren Soto and I introduced it at the end of 2018. So we've been working to get the Token Taxonomy Act passed ever since, and it is not partisan. It's equally balanced with Republicans and Democrats. But look, where does this line break? Fundamentally, there are people that hate crypto. I mean, Elizabeth Warren in the Senate Banking Committee has driven the policy over there. Sherrod Brown basically just does whatever Elizabeth Warren tells him to. And she's been hostile to the entire space. So the question is, can we craft a policy that can get through the House and get a fair hearing in the Senate? And if it's really an effective policy, will the Senate move it? Because it really does do what the SEC is already supposed to do, which is protect investors. Their protecting investors version of it is to kill the market. That's not protecting investors. This market could be great. And it could be much more robust if we provided some nominal level of legal clarity. And so Congress really does need to pass that. I hope it starts quickly with stablecoin regulation, but I'm sure we'll have some really effective hearings in short order.
So just quickly, just to circle back on something we discussed earlier, I don't think stablecoin regulation would specifically address a future FTT, because FTT was not necessarily discussed as a stablecoin. It was more sort of the native currency of FTX. But anyway, my final question is just following up on what you just said about people hating crypto and Elizabeth Warren. What is the mood right now? I mean, you're sort of in Congress. I mean, you kind of have the real bird's eye view. Is it true that the sentiment towards crypto is becoming really more negative inside Congress? I mean, that's the impression that I think a lot of people have, but do you think that's accurate? Do you think that more people are actually turning against crypto or are more likely to advocate for quote unquote crypto unfriendly regulation?
Yeah, I think there's a real danger of that. And things that people don't understand, they tend to fear, and a lot of people don't understand it. And fundamentally, if you look at the top 10 issues in a congressional district, I don't think there's a single congressional district this would be a top 10 issue in. But when you look at for our capital markets and for innovation and the broad potential this offers, I think it's a top 5 issue. I really think it's of fundamental importance to our capital formation in the United States. And it kind of gets at the heart of, what is the future of capitalism? Is it continue to be kind of, the accredited investor, deal flow for the donor class, protected for the elites? SWIFT just banned, transfers of under $100,000. This is simply targeting retail investors. Well, supposedly the biggest, most sophisticated investors in the world just got scammed and burnt by FTX. So why are you going to block the small retail investors, but somehow permit it for the biggest investors? It really smells bad. It looks like an effort, a coordinated effort to kind of harm retail investors and protect the most the most established incumbents, i.e. the biggest banks, who would be disrupted by a permissionless peer-to-peer payment system like Bitcoin.
Just zooming out a little bit, keeping in mind the fact that the G20 finance track is actually meeting in India, several conversations are ongoing. And you actually, in an interview recently, you spoke about China, and you spoke about how China has been using its soft power, and part of that soft power and trade tactics is its aggressive approach on CBDCs, its digital yuan. On the other hand, experts have also very clearly said that the CBDC of China, it could actually lead to de-dollarization. But you've, at the same time, prioritized stablecoins over something like a US CBDC, which would once again, concede that ground to China, which it anyways taken the lead on. So, how does that square off, that cautious approach on CBDC by the US?
Yeah, why would we want to adopt China's version of money? I mean, no one wants Chinese money. Why? Because they're a totalitarian regime controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. Even the wealthy people in China want to get their RMB out of China. They want something to protect themselves and their financial future that isn't subject to the whims of Xi Jinping. So, why would we feel, oh gosh, if we don't adopt Xi Jinping's version of money, we're doomed? But over 100 countries around the world are looking at central bank digital currencies, and they're not looking at decentralized distributed ledger technology like Bitcoin that protects permissionless peer-to-peer transactions, freedom money. They're looking at dystopian Orwellian future money like the Chinese Communist Party's creepy surveillance tool. So we're starting to work on a Privacy Protection Act Payment Privacy Act that would protect the privacy, so that when you pay for something, the data of what exactly you paid for isn't transmitted into the payment system, because that is the heart of what the Chinese Communist Party wants to do. They want to link payments to social credit. And look, in the United States, I mean, Maxine Waters had hearings when she was chairwoman of the House Financial Services Committee on the creepy surveillance state version of that China's working on. And she had subsequent hearings on nationalizing the credit ratings agencies. Like, why would you do that? I mean, every place that you see this depicted in an Orwellian future, it's shown as evil. Like, why would the world be working on this tool? And I think America has to not only stay away from it, we have to work to stop it from spreading. So I think it's really, truly a threat to the values and principles of Western civilization.
On a slightly related topic, of course, Kevin McCarthy, president, about debt ceiling limit. What do you think? Do you think that there'll be an extension of it? There'll be an increase in the debt ceiling? Do you think that there'll be cuts along the way, or do you think that ultimately Congress will give the president what he wants and raise the debt ceiling without any cuts?
I mean, look, the debt ceiling has to be raised. We're not going to default on our debt, so we're going to pay our bills. But the idea that you don't even need a debt ceiling, or the idea that you should just engage in unlimited borrowing, is foolish. I mean, it's akin to a cancer patient saying, I'm just going to pretend that I don't have cancer. I mean, dangerous, foolish, really horrible approach. We know we have a problem with our debt. And the whole point should be to let's agree on a number. I like the idea of a debt to GDP ratio. But the trouble is, we're already over 120% debt to GDP. I mean, this is territory where lots of countries end up going into monetary default. And the United States is the global reserve currency. I mean, this is a real problem, not just for the United States, but for the world. And it seems like a lot of countries want to embrace Chinese version of the future of money. And that's where they're all related. We have to avoid that. If we do have a future of money that's different than the current one, it can't be this Orwellian, creepy surveillance state money China's working on.
Yeah, I guess the question was more about just trying to understand why is the U.S. not, moving ahead with countering China. It's been slow. The stablecoin regulation has still not come up. Subcommittees are being formed right now. It's a bit slow. And just keeping in mind, on the day the subcommittee was actually announced by the Hill, the SEC filed a lawsuit alleging Gemini and Genesis Global Capital sold unregistered securities. And you criticized that move in this tweet, writing, if Gary Gensler was serious about helping investors, he would stop regulation by selective enforcement, something that's been said quite often. We should also note at this point in time that DCG is the parent company of Genesis and CoinDesk. So, what should he have done that he had not done, Gary Gensler? What should he be doing then? Is selective enforcement the entire issue here?
Here's the most basic example. Gensler and crew at the SEC entered into a settlement agreement with Kim Kardashian because she allegedly promoted unregistered securities. Well, what did she promote? She promoted Ethereum Max. Well, they fined her. They had her pay $1.5 million, but Ethereum Max is still trading today. They're not treating it as if it's a security, And if Ethereum Max is a security, why engage in an enforcement action against Ethereum Max versus providing a clear, bright line rule, going through rulemaking and saying if it looks like this and acts like this, then it is a security, and we are first moving on this one, but we're moving on everything that looks like this. And instead, you've got people that are engaging in overt pump and dump scams and getting away with it over the years because the SEC is asleep at the wheel, or in a worst case scenario, co-conspirators to launching things that they themselves say are unregistered securities. So some seem to get a free pass and others seem to get their business models killed. What's the rhyme or reason behind it? And a lot of people say, you know what, I got a business to run. I'm just launching it outside the United States.
Just, before we wrap up, do you think it's a bit harsh to say that they're asleep at the wheel?
Yes, I think it's harsh, and it's meant to be. They have not. Look at the results. I mean, whether you're Elizabeth Warren and want to kill crypto, or you're Warren Davidson and think it offers a great promise for the future if we actually do something productive in legislation about it, no one's happy with the job the SEC's done. So it's Gary Gensler's job to lead that organization, and you really have to question, is Gary Gensler up to the task? And if he is, then is it structural with the SEC? Because the results, I think, are self-evident. They are not getting the job done.